Hey everybody, hope that you guys are doing well. I get asked a fair amount how I got into weddings. How did I book my first wedding? I'm a wedding photographer. We shoot both photo and video, and by we, it's myself and my fiance, and I love it. I have some of the images on my computer screen right now, and I'll throw those up as I'm talking. I want to talk about the details of how I got it and what I used to shoot it and how that all went, because that's something that I hope that can help people. My first wedding that I shot was in 2013. For this wedding, I think I was paid anywhere from $600 to $800, and I also shot an engagement shoot for them. Granted, like that's not a ton of money, especially for where I live. I live in California. But I also knew that like I'm just starting out. I want to try out weddings to see if it's something that I love or something that maybe I'm not gonna like. Because I feel like in the wedding industry, it's very much polarized. There are people who absolutely love weddings, and then there are people who don't. I wanted to give it a shot for myself to see what it was like. I'm the kind of person that I research a lot, but I researched weddings and what it took to get into weddings and the gear that I would need and the things to prepare for a wedding day. So I had a decent idea of what I needed and what I would encounter during a wedding day. In fact, actually a pretty good idea. So that's the first kind of tip is do your research. Do some textbook research into what it takes to shoot a wedding. Now you can use things like YouTube. You can Google and search on forums. Gear-wise, I would recommend having two cameras, one wide and one maybe normal to telephoto. I typically shoot 35-85. I'm really liking 24-50. And that's just kind of a preference thing. You can use zoom lenses. I shoot with primes. There's nothing wrong with using zoom lenses, especially for your first wedding. For this particular wedding that I shot, at the time I owned a Canon 5D, the original 5D. It is not this one, but similar. This is the 5D Mark IV. We've come a little ways since then. But I own the original 5D and a 50mm lens, and that was it. Tip number 2 is to rent gear. For this wedding, I rented a 5D Mark II. I rented a 35mm lens. I think that with the money that I was paid, I went out and bought an 85mm 1.8, which I still use today for weddings. And so to round out the whole gear, I had a 5D Mark II, which was gonna be my main camera with a 35mm L lens that I rented. And then I had a 5D original along with a Fuji X Pro 1. I know that I had the Fuji because some of the pictures show up with the Fuji metadata. That pretty much rounded out my gear list. I had 3 cameras just in case anything happened. I think that 2 is totally fine. And the reason for that is that in case anything happens to your main camera, then you have a backup that you can still continue working with. That's the gear that I used for the wedding. How I got the wedding was kind of just through a friend of a friend. And that's typically how it ends up working. I was kind of dabbling in photography. I was shooting portraits for people, and I had a friend from high school who I hadn't talked to in a while. Her coworker was getting married and they were looking for a photographer, and she mentioned my name. At this point, I was kind of wanting to get into weddings, and I'd started doing some research, and then this opportunity came up. So the bit of information in that is that if you're trying to be a wedding photographer, just start shooting. Just build up your portfolio. And you don't need a wedding or a couple to book you to build that portfolio up. A wedding is a mix of event photography and portraiture. So one of the things that you could go do is just go start taking portraits of people. And to take that a step further, if you're just starting out, go talk to your friends who are in relationships and say, hey, I want to get into photography. Would you mind modeling for me in exchange for me giving you pictures to post on social media? I'm sure that you could find a wedding dress on eBay or at the thrift store, or even just asking around. To take that another step further, you could go to a bridal store, a boutique near you, and say, hey, I'm a photographer. I'm setting up this shoot. I would love to use one of your dresses. I have a model already. Would you mind loaning us a dress? And then in return, I will give you the fully edited pictures at the end of all of it. You can get furniture rental people involved and really go to town with it as much as you like or as little as you'd like. The key is that you're shooting and sharing the photos that you want to get hired for. I will say that you need to be honest. Be honest with your couples. Don't go out and shoot 5 or however many of these styled shoots and say, oh yeah, I'm an experienced wedding photographer, because you're not. Like I said, weddings are a mix of portraits and events. So the portrait side is very controlled. It's a great way to start to hone your technique and to kind of get accustomed to your camera and to learn what settings are going to do what. It's a great way to start out. During a real wedding, you often don't have time to do that. You need to be accustomed with your camera. And that is kind of the next thing that I would say is that once you are accustomed with your camera and you know like this dial does this, this dial adjusts my ISO and this adjusts shutter speed, etc., then you can make the step into, okay, now I can go in and shoot my own wedding. Or even maybe the middle step is second shooting for somebody else. So we've got most of the details covered of how I shot my first wedding, the gear that you're gonna need. Now what? Now, when you get that first opportunity to shoot this wedding, be honest. Be honest with a couple and say that, hey, this is my first wedding that I'm gonna be shooting. I know, and I knew in my situation that I wasn't going to be able to charge what a wedding photographer in my area was going to be charging because this is my first wedding. Like that shouldn't be the case. As photographers, I feel like we spend a lot of time on the gear portion of what we do. However, that makes up maybe like 10, 15, 20% max of what we do, especially for weddings. Weddings are it's an intimate thing that you're being asked to take a part of with this big old camera. So another piece of advice that I would give is that get to know your couple. If you can, shoot their engagement session for them. And if you can't do that, then take them out to coffee, go have dinner with them, spend a night and hang out with them, get to know them, because I promise you that will do wonders for you come wedding day. Imagine the scenario where you are getting married and on your wedding day, this stranger, quote unquote, shows up with a camera and they're ordering you around and taking pictures of you. Or maybe if you're more of a photojournalistic side of the spectrum, then they're just taking pictures in the corner of you. That's kind of an awkward, weird scenario that can easily be avoided by establishing a connection and a relationship prior to the wedding. Shoot the engagement session if possible. And another thing that I love to do is when possible, I love going to the rehearsal because then I get to see the venue, especially if I haven't seen it for the first time. They do their walkthroughs. And what that also does is it allows the rest of the bridal party to meet me and to get accustomed to who I am. That way on wedding day, I show up and they're totally cool with me. I can say hi to the people and at least they've seen me a day or 2 days prior to the wedding. I think that is super helpful also. One of my requirements for a wedding prior to a wedding is that I get a timeline. A lot of times, maybe it's for your first wedding and it might be lower budget, but sometimes couples work with a coordinator, sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's the venue that is putting together a timeline, and other times it's the photographer that's doing it. An easy way to put together a timeline as a photographer is establish what time ceremony is, and then what time the whole thing is over with, and if they're doing an exit at the end. Then the format for the day looks like you have getting ready, you have the ceremony, and then typically after the ceremony you have family formals. After that, you can usually steal the couple away for a little bit and take just solo portraits of them together, just kind of embracing the fact that they're married. And then you jump into the reception, and the reception usually flows kind of on its own. You have entrances, you have cake cutting, speeches, the dances, and then after that, it's usually open dance and everybody goes and has a good time. Sometimes at the end, there'll be an exit, and that's just for you to talk about with them whether or not they're planning on doing that sort of thing, so that way you know ahead of time. That's the whole point of this, is that you know ahead of time before wedding day what the general schedule of the day is going to look like. One of the last things that I recommend also that I do is to have a shot list. Now, a shot list is not necessarily all the photos that the couple wants you to take of their wedding day, things like shoes and the rings and all of that. A shot list is just the combinations of people that the couple wants photographed after the ceremony. Sometimes people will do a first look. They'll see each other before the ceremony. And in that situation, you can kind of knock out some of these prior to ceremony and then any remaining after the ceremony. Either way, the shot list tells you what pictures that the couple want. So example, it would be the couple with, say, her mom and dad, the couple with his mom and dad, or with Aunt Beth and Uncle Joe. And it just goes down and lists these photos. That way on wedding day, you're not looking to them to make the decision of, hey, so let's do family formal portraits now. And can you make sure that you call everybody and find everybody? Nobody wants to do that on their wedding day. My goal is to have my clients have the most smooth wedding day as possible. Things go wrong inevitably, but I want it to be hopefully nothing on my part, and to kind of streamline that process as much as possible. I always tell couples to keep it to the minimum. These are the people who you absolutely want a photo with on your wedding day that you can't live without. And try and manage big groups as best as you can, because it gets kind of hectic. I hope that that helps you guys in getting your first wedding and kind of preparing for your first wedding. If there is any other info that you guys want to hear, let me know down in the comments. I'd love to hear maybe about some other things that you want to know about, or what your first wedding was like. I really appreciate you guys watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.